You were 7, maybe 8. Someone raised their voice in the next room and you didn't cry. You didn't scream. You got very, very quiet. You made yourself small. You figured out without anyone teaching you that the safest version of you was the one nobody noticed. And here's the thing, you probably got really good at it. So good, in fact, that by the time you were an adult, you didn't even realize you were still doing it. You thought that was just your personality. Quiet, easygoing, low maintenance. The friend who never asks for too much. The partner who adjusts. The coworker who says, I'm fine, like it's a reflex, because at some point, it became one. But what if I told you that some of the traits you've always thought of as just you, the things you'd list on a first date or job interview, the qualities people praise you for, what if those aren't your personality at all? What if they're the scar tissue your nervous system built to survive something? It couldn't make sense. Of when you were small. Let me explain what I mean. And I think by the end of this, you might see yourself a little differently. When we talk about childhood trauma, people tend to picture the obvious stuff: abuse, neglect, households that were clearly broken. But most of the trauma that shapes personality doesn't come from a single catastrophic event. It comes from the emotional climate you grew up in. The things that were never said, the comfort that never came, the unpredictability that taught your brain to stay on alert. Not because something terrible was happening right now, but because something terrible could happen at any moment. And your brain, especially the brain of a child, is an unbelievably efficient adaptation machine. It doesn't wait for you to understand what's going on. It just starts building strategies. Coping mechanisms that become so deeply wired, they stop feeling like coping and start feeling like identity. Take hyper-independence, for example. You know, the person who never asks for help, the one who'd rather struggle alone for 3 hours than send one text asking for support. That's not strength. I mean, it looks like strength, and the world rewards it like strength. But underneath it, if you trace it back far enough, there's usually a child who learned that relying on other people led to disappointment, or worse, danger. So they stopped. They became self-sufficient not because they wanted to, but because the cost of needing someone was too high. And the hard part is, by adulthood, they can't tell the difference anymore. The wall they built to protect themselves just feels like who they are. I'm just independent. Sure, but there's a version of independence that comes from confidence, and there's a version that comes from grief. They look almost identical from the outside. The difference is only something you feel at 2 in the morning when you wish you could call someone, but something inside you won't let you. Here's another one that honestly surprised me when I first came across the research. People-pleasing. We think of it as being kind, generous, accommodating, and sometimes it is, but chronic people-pleasing. The kind where you lose track of what you actually want because you're so busy scanning for what everyone else needs that often starts as a survival strategy called fawning. Psychologist Pete Walker identified this as one of the 4 trauma responses, alongside fight, flight, and freeze. Fawning is when a child learns that the safest way to navigate a volatile or emotionally unavailable caregiver is to become whatever that person needs them to be: agreeable, helpful, invisible in their own desires. And it works. It keeps the peace. It reduces conflict. But the price is that the child never learns to feel their own feelings because their entire emotional system gets rewired to monitor everyone else's. Fast forward 20 years, and you've got an adult who's incredible at reading a room but can't answer the question, what do you actually want, without panicking a little. And then there's hypervigilance. This one hides in plain sight because our culture actually celebrates it. The friend who notices everything, the employee who catches every mistake, the partner who can sense a mood shift from across the room before a single word is spoken. We call these people perceptive, intuitive, emotionally intelligent, and they are. But that radar, that constant environmental scanning, it didn't develop because the world was interesting. It developed because the world was unsafe. A child in a chaotic home learns to read micro-expressions the way a sailor learns to read the sky. Not for fun, for survival. The neuroscience backs this up in a way that's almost heartbreaking. Studies on children raised in high-stress environments show measurable changes in the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center. It becomes larger, more reactive, quicker to fire, which means the adult who grew up in that kind of environment isn't just paying more attention. Their brain is literally wired to perceive threats that other people's brains filter out. They're not being dramatic when they say they feel everything. They do. Their nervous system never got the memo that the danger passed. There's something else that doesn't get talked about enough. The one that hides behind achievement. Some of the most driven, accomplished, successful people you'll ever meet are running on an engine that was built in childhood by the belief that love was conditional. that they had to earn their place. That being enough required evidence, a report card, a trophy, a promotion, a number on a scale. Perfectionism that comes from trauma isn't about high standards. It's about the terror of what happens when you fall short. Because once upon a time, falling short meant losing connection. And to a child, connection is survival. I think this is the part most people miss. We look at these traits, the independence, the people pleasing, the vigilance, the drive, and we either admire them or we try to fix them. But we rarely stop to honor what they actually are. They're proof that you survived something. They're the evidence of an incredibly intelligent nervous system that did the best it could with what it had. You weren't broken by your childhood. You were shaped by it, and there's an enormous difference between those two things. But here's where it gets more nuanced and honestly more hopeful. The fact that these patterns were learned means they can be unlearned. Not erased, that's not how the brain works, but updated. You can't go back and give your 7-year-old self the safety they needed, but you can start recognizing when your adult responses are coming from that old operating system. And gently, with patience, start building a new one. It starts with noticing, just noticing. The next time you catch yourself saying, "I'm fine," before you've even checked in with yourself, pause. The next time you feel the pull to manage someone else's emotions before acknowledging your own, pause. The next time you refuse help, not because you don't need it, but because something in your chest tightens at the thought of asking, notice that. That tightness has a history, and it deserves your curiosity more than your judgment. Therapists who specialize in trauma, particularly those trained in modalities like EMDR, somatic experiencing, and internal family systems, often talk about the difference between a trauma response and a personality trait. The distinction isn't always clean. Sometimes it's both. But the question worth asking isn't, "What's wrong with me?" It's, "What happened to me and how did I adapt?" Because when you ask it that way, everything changes. The self-criticism softens, the shame loosens its grip, and you start to see your own patterns not as flaws to fix, but as maps. Maps that show you exactly where the wound is and exactly where the healing needs to go. So if you've ever wondered why you're the way you are, why you can't relax even when everything is fine, why you give and forget to receive, why you keep yourself at arm's length from the people you love the most, it might not be a personality flaw, it might be the echo of a very old story your body is still telling. And the most powerful thing you can do isn't to silence that story. It's to finally listen to it. If any of this felt familiar, I'd love to hear about it. Not because you owe anyone your story, but because sometimes naming the thing out loud, even in a comment, is the first time it becomes real. And you might be surprised how many people in this community are carrying something that looks exactly like yours.